Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our Shavuot Tikkun Plenary session with author Sarah Hurwitz, in conversation with Tom Fields-Meyer.
As you all know, tonight is a night where we are coming together to receive Torah. A night of revelation, of history, of wisdom, of relationship, and of self. Tonight we join together to learn in Hevruta, our people's most traditional way of engaging in learning, and specifically text. The fundamental piece of Hevruta is give and take, of listening without crafting a response, of opening yourself to learning something new and sharing your own perspective with the hope of being heard and challenged. Hevruta is about relationship. Sometimes with a friend and sometimes with someone who is best suited to help you learn any kind of lesson through the texts of life. Tonight, we wanted to start off this Tikkun Leil Shavuot with a model Hevruta. In their conversation and centering around Sarah Hurwitz's work as a master speechwriter, thinker, listener, and author, together in Hevruta with Tom Fields-Meyer, a brilliant mind, exceptional listener, artful author, and valued friend of our LA Jewish community, we will see what it looks like to learn in partnership. Thank you both for being our role models this evening, and now I want to share a brief bio for both Sarah and Tom. Sarah Hurwitz is the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there, which was a finalist for 2 National Jewish Book Awards and for the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature, and of the forthcoming As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Shame, Blame, and Try to Erase Us. She was a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, starting out as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama and then serving as head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Prior to working in the White House, Hurwitz was the chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. Sarah is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Tom Fields-Meyer is author of the memoir Following Ezra, a National Jewish Book Award finalist and co-author with Dr. Barry Prezant of Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, which has been the best-selling book on its topic for a decade. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, and many other national outlets. An instructor in the UCLA Extension Writers Program, he has collaborated with many published authors as an editor and writer. Tom is, most importantly, a dear friend and teacher of mine. Bechavod, Sarah and Tom.
Chag Sameach. Thank you, Rabbi Schatz. Those for your generous, wonderful words. And before we begin, I want to thank Rabbi Schatz and Rabbi Panitz for organizing and planning this entire night. Not just this session, but all of them, and there are a lot of moving parts, and they both do such a great job putting this all together. I'm a proud member of both of these communities, Ikar and Temple Beth Am. I have and this is really a perfect way for us to engage in a night of Torah learning and text study to bring our communities together. And a wonderful way to kick it off to have Sarah with us to discuss her journey exploring Judaism as an adult, and then the other parts of her story, which are in her upcoming book you're going to hear a lot about. It's a really wonderful book. We're going to get a sneak peek. It's coming out in the fall, as you'll hear. I want to frame this discussion just a little bit, echoing some of what Rabbi Schatz said, because in Shul yesterday there were a few people who had heard this was going to be happening and were really excited to meet Sarah Hurwitz and said, "Tom, what's your role going to be?" So, as Rabbi Schatz said, this is a night of Hevruta. It's not going to be a night of top-down study where we're receiving Torah from our teachers and our rabbis, but really, I mean, there is some of that, but we're going to be engaging with each other in Hevruta, in study with peers. So we're going to be doing that, Sarah and I, to begin. So why, you may ask, why this particular Hevruta? So I'm a writer, as Rabbi Schatz said, and I did a little bit of research and found that Sarah and I share three significant things in common. We went to the same college. She was a couple years behind me. And we both write books. And as you already heard, Sarah was chief speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. And as it happens, I have also worked as a close advisor to an amazing woman leader who is inspiring and outspoken, Rabbi Tom Fields-Meyer. So I'm used to this role of letting women shine. So tonight I'll be in that role, and Sarah and I will be engaging, but really my role is a job that both Sarah and I are very familiar with, working with other people, and that is to be elevating and amplifying my Hevruta, Sarah. So with that background, Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here. I have to say, I am a big fan of Tom and Sean's work because I am a good friend of their son, Ami, in Washington, D.C., whom I adore. And to be in the community that raised Ami is pretty special. And I will say, this is the first time I'm talking about my new book. And usually, like, when you try out new material, you want to find just a small, kind of obscure crowd. And it's like, this is possibly the worst. But, like, rabbis, dean of a rabbinical school, scholars, deeply engaged, learned Jews. So, I mean, terrible idea, but I'm thrilled to be here. And I really welcome your feedback, your pushback, your comments, because I think you will make me better and smarter. And that is the whole art of Hevruta. So thank you for having me. And Tom, thank you for being in conversation.
Okay. So let's start on uncomfortable territory for you rather than the new material. So we are going to be talking about Sarah's new book, and since it's Shavuot, we're also going to be talking in general about studying Jewish texts and what we all gain from that. But as I said, we're both writers, and I want to start with a writing question, which is, you spent many years as a political speechwriter. So I'm curious, what was your path to finding yourself as a speechwriter for Michelle Obama? And maybe you could share a few stories from that period.
Yeah. I mean, the honest answer is just a lot of failure. To be totally honest, you know, I got my start as an intern in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office, which is dating myself. And those guys helped me get my first two speechwriting jobs out of college, both of which were total failures. My second one was as a speechwriter for Senator Tom Harkin, this wonderful guy from Iowa. And after about a year, his chief of staff sat me down and said, "I hear you've applied to law school. You should go." I was 23. I don't know why they hired me. Could not write my way out of a paper bag. Went to law school, hated it, but fortunately met a guy named Josh Gottheimer my third week there, and he was a speechwriter for President Clinton beforehand. He's now a Democratic member of Congress. We started freelancing together, and he really taught me how you write to be heard rather than read. Very different skills. We got jobs on General Wes Clark's primary campaign in 2003, lost. Got jobs on John Kerry's campaign in 2004, lost. Got a job as Hillary's chief speechwriter. Guess what happened, indeed. And then, fortunately, I don't know why they would hire me with this record, but the Obama campaign hired me, and he won. Thrilling new experience for me. And I helped Mrs. Obama with her 2008 convention speech. And you know, really fell in love with her, but I was there to write for him, very determined to write for the president, which I did for a year and a half before realizing I really liked writing for her better. So made an unusual career move in moving from the president to the first lady, but loved it. And I will say, you just never have the day you're going to have. I'll share a quick story from 2009, which is I wrote the president's first college graduation speech, handed it in a week early, very proud of myself, heard nothing, figured he loved it. The morning of the speech, I get a call from the Oval Office saying the president would like to see me. which he's not inviting me in there to be like, nice job, champ, nailed it. Like, that's not what's happening. So I go in and he's like, this is not the speech I want to give. Sorry, didn't get to look at it till last night. It was 2009, the economy was crashing, fair enough. And so he said he dictated an entirely new speech. And I thought, like, this speech is tonight. So I ran back to my office. I started rewriting. I got him a new draft. He didn't like it. I rewrote some more. The motorcade to Air Force One left without me, so they put me on the helicopter with the president. I'm like running to the South Lawn. I have like my laptop open. I'm on Marine One where it's very tiny inside, and I'm trying to edit the speech. And as we're flying over the Washington Mall, he goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "Really?" And he said, "Enjoy the view. You don't get to see this every day." Very kind. We get on the plane. We're still rewriting the speech. The computers on Air Force One are very slow. There was a keystroke delay, so you'd hit a key, and then the letter would appear on the screen like a second later. Maddening. We land. We're still rewriting the speech in the motorcade to the event, and I'm thinking, like, this is a disaster. Like, this is very bad. And somehow the man walked up to the podium and delivered the speech like he'd been delivering it for his entire life. Flawless, emotional, everyone's laughing, they're crying. I'm like, oh my God. And we get back in the cars, we get on the plane, and he just saunters down the aisle and he's like, "Hey, think that went well, huh?" Like, yeah, sir, that was great. So, never have the day you think you're going to have. That was a fun day in the White House. Thank you for applauding me. I'm still amazed I survived it.
So you spent 8 years in the Obama White House and then moved from there to the next logical step for someone in that position, which is you wrote a book about Judaism.
Right. My colleagues thought it was a great idea. Everyone really, really believed in it.
So how did you get from point A to point B?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was sort of a surprising career trajectory. I grew up maybe like some of you, but maybe not. Judaism growing up for me was like a few dull high holiday services and, Hebrew school, which was dull and not much going on at home. And, I kind of just thought like Judaism is a religion, right? Like Christians have a church, we have a temple. They say prayers in church to their God. We do the same in our temple. They have holidays, we have holidays. They have Sunday school, we have Hebrew school. They learn universal values like help the poor and be nice, and so do we. And I found none of it particularly compelling, so I kind of gently walked away. And then about 25 years later, at the age of 36, I broke up with a guy I was dating, was very lonely and anxious, and I heard about an Intro to Judaism class at the local JCC, and I enrolled just to escape my apartment. I was really looking for very little. I thought, I'm a cultural Jew. I should know about my culture. But what I found there just blew me away. Here was 3,000 years of wisdom about what it means to be human, precisely none of which I had seen in those 2 high holiday services I grudgingly sat through each year. It was amazing. It turns out the Torah and the Siddur were not the only Jewish texts. Who knew? I didn't know that growing up. Who knew there were 2,500 years of millions of pages of commentary and debate on the most important questions of what it means to exist? Who knew that there were all of these primal, powerful rituals, these technologies to help us process the most challenging parts of life? I remember just learning about Kriya, this ritual, as you know, where, when someone you love dies, you tear your shirt. Like, and there is all this Jewish law about how you stitch up the shirt, where you don't hide the stitches, but I just thought, like, what an amazing, amazing thing. And so I started learning. I read hundreds of books. I attended classes, and I decided I wanted to write the book that I was looking for. There were a lot of great nuts and bolts, like how-to books, and then there were just mind-numbingly excruciating, sophisticated books that you had to kind of break your head against to understand. And there really wasn't a lot for a Jew like me who, yes, I needed the basics, but I also needed the deeper. I needed the why too. And I thought, like, okay, I'm going to try to write that book, which was very, very hard. Much made White House speechwriting look like a joke. That was very difficult. But, I think one thing that's been gratifying is just so many Jews have said, like, your story is so relatable. Like, that was my story. And then the weird thing is, many very observant traditional Jews have said, this book is for me. And I'm like, no, it definitely was not. It was not for you at all. But they said, no, hear me out. Like, I don't practice like you do. I disagree with a lot of what you write, but like, you made me think differently. You made me fall in love with our tradition in a new way. And you had 550 endnotes, so clearly you did your homework. Like, I see that you care about this tradition, even if I think you're wrong about a lot of it. And that was really very meaningful.
Your book is full of all kinds of texts, ancient and modern Jewish texts. Tonight is Shavuot. It's a night of learning. Are there texts that you think of that were particularly inspiring or moving or transformative for you?
Oh my God. I mean, so many. I think it's more, thinking about the wisdom. I mean, it's not particular texts because I just was sort of imbibing so many of them. But, I think the core ideas were so fascinating to me. You have Judaism, as my friend Rabbi Shoshana Boyd Gelfand says, Judaism exists, Jewish thought exists in polarities. It's like, remember the stranger, but also don't forget about Amalek. When, justice is important, but so is mercy. We are constantly being called to hold totally opposing truths and to wrestle with both of them. I thought that was very powerful. I also thought, studying the ethical thinking of Judaism, just studying a very simple text that I'm sure many of you have studied, which is the idea that if you go into a store, you shouldn't ask the shopkeeper the price of an item if you have no intention of buying anything. The idea is that you're wasting their time, you're getting their hopes up. Or another text like, if you've loaned someone money and they're still struggling and you happen to see them coming down the street towards you, you should try to avoid running into them. Now, you could say, okay, that is so legalistic and nitpicky and weedy. Judaism is clearly a religion of law, not love, that old anti-Semitic canard. But what I began to realize when studying Jewish ethics is that this was setting a very, very high bar for love. What it was doing is it was sort of focusing me in on this particular person with this particular issue right in front of me. It was almost like going to the eye doctor where they're clicking the little machine and you're getting more finer and finer. It's like, okay, the rule is X, but if the person has Y issue, then the rule is, but if that, you're kind of clicking in, getting in more and more finely tuned on this person to see them in all of their needs, their dignity, their humanity. It's very powerful and very much flies in the face of a lot of modern thinking, which is actually we just divide people up into two big categories: powerful, powerless, oppressor, oppressed, and we like or hate them accordingly, which is sort of like clicking the vision machine backwards so that all you can see are these two blurry blobs, and it's very dehumanizing. So I thought, this is a fascinating way to see the world. And then finally, in a society where we are just so grossed out by human weakness and mortality, aging, sickness, dying, we want nothing to do with it. It's like throw a whole industry to fight it, to fight aging. If someone's sick, just send a text. If someone's died, just send some flowers. Just stay away, right? We really kind of run from that. Those are what is known as thin places. They're sort of places where the boundaries between heaven and earth and life and death kind of thin out, and people are really clinging to the edges of life. And the secular world says, run like hell from those places. They are gross, they are scary. And Judaism says, no, run like hell to those places. You get as close as possible. You get your body to that bedside. You get your body to that shiva. You get your body to that funeral. You be with people in those harrowing, thin places. And this is just something that we are so sorely missing today. And just to find this radical countercultural wisdom, it was, again, I didn't really see any of this growing up. So pretty amazing.
Yeah. I can actually, as you described that, I'm thinking of a number of people in this room who model exactly the values that you were just discussing. So let's turn to your new book. So it's coming out in September. I want to get the title right. It's called As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Blame, Shame, and Try to Erase Us. And I got a peek at this book, and it's really wonderful. And this book was inspired in part by a different kind of work you've been doing as you were training as a hospital chaplain. Can you tell us how working as a hospital chaplain or training as a hospital chaplain led you to write a book called As a Jew?
Yeah, I mean, the word itself, chaplain, is quite Christian, which is really interesting. So, many people, when I was doing this, they were like, oh, but very confusing, because this is a very Christian word. But the short answer is, during COVID, I was really inspired by all these amazing healthcare providers who were risking and sacrificing their lives to care for people. And I heard about this idea of being a chaplain, and it's open to people of all faith traditions and none. And I just thought, this is something I want to do. And so I signed up. I filled in the application, which was, it asked me about my ministry and my church position, which I was like, okay, that feels not welcoming, but that's all right. I'm just going to plow through. And then, I am like a gold star getting, I want the A, I'm the teacher's pet, I want to be liked. And I found myself getting into these very strange arguments with my instructors, all of whom were Christian. Pretty much all my classmates were Christian. And I remember one of these arguments was that I had an instructor who swore that this kind of prayer, God, please heal my friend Tom. He needs help. God, I'm beseeching you. Tom is right here. He can hear me. This is spontaneous. It's from my heart. We're sitting together. I'm praying out loud spontaneously for Tom. Look, Jews can do that kind of prayer. It's not prohibited. It's lovely. Be my guest. We generally don't. I think if you did that kind of prayer for many Jews in a hospital, they would feel a little uneasy. It would feel a little Christian to them. And so I told that to my instructor, and she said, no, that is a universal form of prayer. It's universal. As long as you don't say Jesus, it is not Christian. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it's not universal. And she's like, I'm pretty sure it is. And I was like, no, it's weird. And I thought, like, okay, that's interesting. And then there was one day where a patient of mine wanted a Bible, and so I brought it to her. And later on, I just saw her in bed, and she was just absorbed in its pages, and she was so moved, and she was just reading it straight up. And I thought, that is how I used to think you read the Torah. You just sit down, and you're like, I'm going to find comfort and meaning and inspiration, and then you open it up, and you're like, what the hell is this, right? I was like very confusing. And I began to realize, like, growing up in this Christian country, I have been soaked in Christianity. I speak Christian. I think Christian. Starting with the idea that Judaism is a religion. I thought growing up, Judaism is a religion, like Christianity. Shul, church, holiday, okay, we don't have Jesus, but like same. I thought growing up that spirituality was like your body and this carnal world are bad and fallen, and there's a spirit world that's good. That's spirituality, right? Body bad, spirit good. That universal. Studying Judaism, I was like, wait, that's not actually a central Jewish idea. Interesting. Even the idea of what is spiritual practice. I thought like saying scripted communal prayers in a temple, that's it. That's the ball game. No, like study is a central Jewish spiritual practice. I was like, wow, that's very interesting how my idea of Judaism was I'd seen it so through the lens of Christianity. And that was a very big inspiration for this book.
Okay. And you said you write that another inspiration was a visit you made to College Hillel in 2022. And that inspired you to this sort of journey through Jewish history, and you've really made some sobering and clarifying discoveries along the way. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this visit took place back in 2022, and it was sort of in the wake of the whole 2021 Gaza war, where just the online rhetoric was just really extreme. Like I had friends posting things that I was like, whoa, this is something feels different about this. But I didn't think too much about it. I went to this college campus, and big, very prestigious state school, and I was speaking to the students at Hillel, and this girl raises her hand, and she said, how did you deal with anti-Semitism when you were in college? To which I said, like, what? Like, I literally didn't understand the question. I had to ask for clarification several times, because in the 90s at Harvard, I experienced precisely zero anti-Semitism. Like, zero. Like, incomprehensible to me. And so I was like, I'm sorry. And then she said, I told my classmate that I went to Hebrew school as a kid, and she screamed Free Palestine in my face. And I was like, okay. And so I asked them, like, how many of you have felt uncomfortable as a Jew on this campus? And a lot of the kids raised their hands. I was like, that's interesting. And, this stuff is kind of in the air. And I started just going back through history and, beginning to actually really study anti-Semitism. There is the same neural groove that has very much been worn into the Western world's imagination, and it was, it predates Christianity, but Christianity very much theologized it, which is this idea of Jews as being diabolically powerful, very, very powerful, threatening, dangerous, disgustingly depraved, just evil, perverted, all the bad things and in a conspiracy to hurt us. And this neural groove, it starts, early Christianity was very much defined against Judaism. And you see this kind of winding its way through history, all of these ideas, and these ideas morph, they shift, but just to see this neural groove, it was very sobering to me, honestly. And then I reached the 1800s in Western Europe. And look, not all Jews have European roots. 25% of Jews in the world are not European. Half of Jews in Israel are not European. But for understanding American Jewish identity, since the vast majority of us do have European roots, this is quite important. And, looking at the Western European Jews in the early 1800s, as they are dealing with the breakdown of the old monarchical order, people are becoming citizens in these modern nation states, and there is this Jewish question about, okay, well, can these Jews be Frenchmen or Germans, or are they just Jews? Like, are they nationally Jews whose loyalty is to Israel, or can they be nationally Germans or Frenchmen whose loyalty is to this European state? And Jews themselves made the argument, like, no, we're not Jews. We are Frenchmen of the Jewish persuasion, Frenchmen of the Mosaic persuasion. They started to pitch Judaism as a religion. We were granted citizenship, and then Jews started quickly assimilating. They started converting to Christianity, and early Jewish reformers made a decision to say, okay, we need to stop this movement to Christianity. We need to figure out a way to help Jews be Jewish in the modern era. And, I have such respect for them. I have such respect for what they did. They had such courage. They were so devoted to this tradition. They really wanted to modernize it. And, they then started pitching the idea of Judaism as a religion rather than a peoplehood. They began to emphasize what Judaism shares with Christianity. We share the Old Testament. We share prophetic morality. They really de-emphasized all of our post-biblical textual tradition, which is kind of important. Just really kind of it's really kind of important. It's kind of the basis of all of our so much of our profound wisdom, and that kind of was pushed aside. They started ditching a lot of these primal rituals like Kriya, like blowing a shofar, which they were replacing with a trumpet and an organ. And as I'm reading this history, it's both inspiring because they were saving our tradition. They were modernizing us, and thank God they did. I'm a Jew today because of these reformers, and I say this gently and not as a criticism, because I hate it when people criticize their ancestors or their brothers and sisters in other places for very difficult circumstances, but in some ways they kind of took a Protestant cookie cutter, jammed it into Judaism, and got rid of a lot of what didn't fit. And, the result is the Judaism I grew up with. And, decades later, you have Orthodoxy as a reaction to this reform. And so, it was this sort of devastating realization that, so much of modern Judaism is this kind of this reaction. It's they saved Judaism, but there was this cost. And I think, studying anti-Semitism, studying our reaction to it, I began to feel wow, my Judaism has been highly colonized by 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism and 200 years of just courageous, heroic, understandable attempts to erase ourselves in order to be safe and to fit in and to be modern. And, it's a really... we are now at a moment where I think we need to reckon with these costs. And I almost I have this hypothetical in my mind where I want us to go back to the year 1800, not being soaked in Christian hegemony, not being soaked in anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. What if we went back to that moment? And what if we could actually just mine our tradition with love, with curiosity, without disdain, without imbibing the hatred of those around us, but look at it with fresh eyes? And that is what so many people are doing today, which is so exciting, that project of reclaiming. And that's kind of the project that I argue that we need to undergo.
Mm-hmm. You kept going to, as we said, you started at Hillel, and then you kept going back to College Hillel's. You told me that since October 7th, 2023, you've been at something like 25 college campuses. And you write about that in your book, and you've seen things that all of us have been reading about. Sometimes you hear anti-Semitism is horrible on campuses. Sometimes you hear, well, it's not as bad on this campus as you've heard. But what's your impression of that?
So, the answer is yes, right? Campuses are so diverse, so any generalizations you're making are just not going to be true. And kids have very different experiences and reactions, and even a single campus will be internally quite diverse. One department will be terrible, one will be great. So, you can't generalize, but, Hillel sent me to many of the worst campuses. So what I'm saying reflects that experience. And, I came straight from 1996 to these campuses. So I was shocked. What shocked me most was just the extremism of the ideological persuasions of these students. They had kind of put Israel in the same bucket as the KKK and the Nazi Party. So I can't be guys, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a liberal Nazi. Come on. Or I'm in the KKK, but I don't hate minorities. It's just white pride. It's okay, come on. Right? The KKK and the Nazi Party are entities that need to be eliminated. We don't, that's silly to try to have any contact with them. It's abhorrent. And, once you've put Israel in that bucket, I began to kind of understand why so many students I talked to were being just ostracized. A lot of the progressive students clubs had kind of informal, no Zionists allowed. And I have to tell you, the Hillel students I talked to had very nuanced views on Israel. They were troubled by the occupation. They hate the current government. They're anguished about the war in Gaza. These are pretty sophisticated, thoughtful kids, but there was no room for that. To have any connection with Israel whatsoever was absolutely unacceptable, which just shuts down dialogue. If you're going to say, well, to talk to you would be to normalize Zionism, well, then there's really no conversation. And so just to hear, to see the way these kids were ostracized, to see the way that student clubs were all allying with Students for Justice in Palestine, including on one campus, the beekeeping club and the gardening club, which I was if any clubs don't need a foreign policy, I think it's probably those two. But, that's where it was. And also just seeing authority figures really abusing their authority, making all kinds of comments that were wildly inappropriate. One that continues to haunt me is this girl who told me, very sweet freshman girl, very moderate in her views. Her RA in her dorm, her resident advisor, would neither look at her nor speak to her because she decided the girl was a Zionist. And I just remember thinking, how do you even measure that? Is that one incident? Is it a year-long incident? Is it how do you do an incident count around that? So I don't know. It was pretty depressing. I think it's probably maybe gotten better on some campuses. It's really hard to know. I do think Trump's efforts to defund these schools is utterly unhelpful and basically using Jews as a tool to fight wokeness, which when other people are using us as a tool, generally not great. So I don't know. I haven't been to a campus for a few months, but what I saw was really alarming and really heartbreaking.
And you talked a minute ago about the research you did on anti-Semitism for the book. Did that help you to make sense of some of what you've been seeing both on campuses and really throughout America these days?
Yeah, these poor kids are super confused, and it's understandable. Right, for most of them, the only anti-Semitism education they have is Holocaust education. So they get to campus and they're well, they're not Nazis, so maybe it's okay. They don't know how to process this. And I think what's really important to understand about modern anti-Semitism is something that Dara Horn writes very well. If you've learned about the Holocaust, you've learned about eliminationist anti-Semitism. The Jews are bad. There is nothing they can do to be okay or acceptable. We must eliminate them. Holocaust, pogroms, very straightforward. But there's another kind that is a conversionist kind of anti-Semitism, which is the Jews are indeed bad, but there is something they can do to be okay, safe, acceptable. And that thing is they can reject whatever aspect of Jewish civilization that we as the majority deem disgusting. So back in the day, if you rejected Judaism and converted to Christianity, you might be okay, maybe, for a while. Might save you. Okay. When my parents and grandparents were coming of age, it was get rid of your nose, your name, be a WASP, and then maybe you'll be acceptable. Maybe we'll let you into our club. And today the demand is get rid of your Zionism and then you'll be acceptable, then you'll be saved. And sometimes just reading the narratives of some of these students, the historical resonance is just kind of devastating, where the narrative is growing up, my rabbi and my Hebrew school teachers, they told me Israel was awesome and amazing. And then I got to campus and I heard that it was actually genocidal and colonial. And I saw the light. I had an epiphany and I took anti-colonialism and anti-Zionism into my heart and now I'm saved. And their classmates are now you're saved, now you're a good Jew. And there's just something so heartbreaking about that. I think understanding that is important. I also think a lot of the kids were confused about the difference between political and social anti-Semitism. We think of anti-Semitism as like a social prejudice. Like, Jews are ugly, dirty, cheap. I don't want them in my club. I don't want a Jew to marry my daughter. Like, okay, hello 1953. Like, this is sort of that's not really the main kind of anti-Semitism today. What we see today is this kind of political anti-Semitism, which is this idea that we, the majority, are engaged in this grand moral project, and the only thing stopping us are the Jews. We, the majority, are engaged in the project of Christianizing the Roman Empire. What is stopping us? The Jews. We, the majority, are engaged in the project of communism, the grand, brotherhood of man. Who is stopping us? Capitalist Jews. We, the Germans, are engaged in the process of Aryanism and German nationalism. Again, the race-polluting Jews are stopping us. And you see this today on the right and left in America. On the right, you have people saying America is a white Christian country, and we are saving white civilization, but the only thing stopping us are these Jews importing black and brown people. This hideous Great Replacement theory, which Tucker Carlson and many others promulgate. It is widespread on the right. And then on the left, you have this, we are engaged in the grand project of anti-colonialism and anti-racism. Who is stopping us? These colonialist, racist Jews in Israel. And I think, explaining this to the students, they're like, oh, okay, it's not just like you're a Jew, you're ugly, and you're racially gross. It's something a little bit different. And the truth is, like, there aren't really sides here. I've just said on the right there's this, on the left there's that. But my friend Dara Horn said to me recently, she's like, if you think there's sides, you're doing it wrong. Like, there really aren't sides here. This is kind of the same stuff. It's just being expressed in different parts of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So, and given all of that, what can we as Jews do about anti-Semitism?
I get asked this question a lot. And I find it like adorable in some ways. Like, I'm like, oh, that's sweet. Cause like they're like, if we just had the right tweet, like if we just had the right PR, we would do it. And like, there are 16 million of us with an M. Okay. That's the size of one city in China. Okay. We're a city in China. And there are 8 billion people in the world. The idea that we are going to control anti-Semitism or end anti-Semitism is just completely delusional. We can spend a lot of time kind of trying to bail out this tsunami, but I would really, and again, many people are doing great work on that front. I welcome them. I do think that can make a difference. But like, at some point, I think we have to really focus more of our energy to building an ark, like to ride out the storm. Bailing out the flood is, I think, pretty tough. I think the way we fight anti-Semitism is by being proud, passionate, incredibly engaged Jews, by just being the most learned, passionate, however that looks. It looks 7 million different ways, right? There's no one right way to do it, but it is digging in deep in our traditions and just living out the best of who we are. I also think, something I said to students on campus, it's like, look, if kids are excluding you from your club, try to reach out, try to have a dialogue, but if they won't talk to you, form your own climate club and make it radically inclusive. Make it welcome to anyone of any background. Say, everyone is welcome here if you want to fight climate change. And then make your club awesome. Jews knew how to do this decades ago. We built our own law firms, hospitals, universities. We knew how to do this, and we made them open to everyone. We made them inclusive, and we made them awesome. And if we have to do that again, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And finally, we've got to do better on anti-Semitism education. Like, Holocaust education is incredibly important. I'm the biggest proponent. It can't be anti-Semitism education. It just can't. It does not teach you about anti-Semitism at all. If you get Holocaust education, at least as I did, it was like, in the mid-1930s, the civilized world lost its mind and started killing Jews. And it's like, why? Because of prejudice and scapegoating. It's like, oh, okay. That's like, wait, but why the Jews? It's because of prejudice and scapegoating. It's like, okay, but why the Jews? Doesn't quite answer the question. And the answer is because of 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism that then morphed and drew a neural groove into the world's mind. Hard to teach that in American public school, right? That's a challenge. So I think we really, and it also, Holocaust education doesn't help you understand a lot of modern anti-Semitism. You need to know Soviet anti-Zionism and Islamist anti-Semitism. There's a lot that we're not teaching our kids. So I think better anti-Semitism education would really, really help.
And you talked about being the importance of committed, passionate, engaged Jews, and toward the end of your book, you use this phrase, knowing Jews, that we should be knowing Jews. What does it mean to be knowing Jews, and how do we do that?
So I think it starts with reversing the category error that we made 200 years ago, in which we decided that Judaism was a religion. Judaism is not just a religion, it is a civilization, it is a people. And a religion is wonderful, it has dogma, it has creeds, that's great, but a civilization has languages, cultures, history, incredible diversity of people. We need to learn this stuff. We can't just have the Protestant cookie cutter version of Judaism. We actually have to learn the whole richness of our tradition. And that is very hard to do. I will tell you, I had to do it as an adult. It was not easy. It took me thousands of hours, which is actually why I've written these 2 books, because no one has thousands of hours, right? That is not realistic. So I really wanted to try to distill this down to a way that would be accessible and engaging for people. And guess what? A lot of other people have done this as well. We have to figure out a way to teach this, and it's going to involve a sense that to be a Jew is not to believe in a religion, but to be part of a civilization and a people that is engaged in a lifelong process of learning. I think we have to recenter study as a Jewish spiritual practice much earlier than we do. I think that should be core to any shul's mission, and it's not going to be easy. I didn't go to day school, but I am really a big fan of the idea of day school. And I think for a lot of Jews like me, I think that's a hard sell. And I actually realized I was talking with someone I really respect who grew up sort of similar to me. And I was saying, I think it's hard to give a kid a really deep Jewish education without day school. It's just hard to teach them all the things. She got very offended, and she said, that's not true. I had Hebrew school. I had Hebrew high school. I got a great Jewish education. I thought, how did they teach her everything in just a few hours a week? I'm trying to imagine, what was this like? And then I realized, she thinks of Judaism as a religion with a set of values, a few holidays, and that makes sense, right? For her to be I don't need day school for that. So I'm beginning to realize there's a real communications challenge I think we have with Jews who grew up like I did, to actually sort of gently explain to them that this is a civilization. It is very big and vast and deep, and it takes some real effort to teach and to learn.
I think we have a Pressman Academy T-shirt for you to wear as you're out promoting this.
I'll take it. I will take it.
Last question. I want to get back to where we started, which was your work in the White House. Looking back on that these years later, are there any Jewish moments that you remember as particularly moving or inspiring in your time at the White House? Yeah,
I say there are 2. The first is the first time I got to go to a Hanukkah party in the White House, which was I was so excited to get to go to this thing, and I get there, and there's 600 Jews just kind of crammed into the East Wing of the White House, and it's really quite beautiful. And out of nowhere, someone starts singing Ma'oz Zor in Hebrew, just singing, and people start joining in. And then there are 600 Jews singing a song in Hebrew in the East Wing of the White House. I just thought, not only could my grandparents not have imagined this, I don't think my parents could have imagined this. That to have hundreds of Jews feeling proud and comfortable enough to start singing a song in Hebrew and have no hesitation, have no sense is this socially appropriate? It was really, it was very moving. And I'll say one final story. I got to write the First Lady's final college graduation speech, which was at the City College of New York. And when I found out that she was giving this speech, I was very moved, because that story has kind of a special place in our family lore. When my great-grandparents came to America, they had 5 daughters. And my great-grandmother was so excited because they moved to New York City, which had this city college system that educated Jews, educated people with no money, and some of it educated women. And she just thought, maybe my daughters can get an education. But unfortunately, they left New York, they moved to Massachusetts, and my grandmother, who was one of those daughters, she never got to go to college. And this was a source of such heartbreak for her entire 99 years. Up until her last years of life, she just felt such sadness, because she was passionate about politics. She was a passionate Roosevelt Democrat. She gave so much of her income to charity each year, her pretty meager income, that at one point she got audited by the IRS. And when she produced her meticulously kept receipts, the agent in charge of her case actually wrote her an apology note. This is family lore. True, who knows, but great story. And, she had really wanted to go into politics. She'd wanted to run for office. She'd wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer and just help represent people who were struggling. That was her passion. And, here I am just 2 generations later. I have gone to college. I have gone to law school. I am walking every day to my job behind the gates of the White House. And now here I am rolling up with the first black first lady of the United States to the city college to see my boss delivering a speech I helped write to students sitting in the very chair where my bubby yearned to sit. And, here are hundreds of this generation of striving, dreaming immigrants. Right? These are people who commute 3 hours a day round trip. They are raising families. They are working 2 jobs. And just to say, what an American story and what a Jewish story to come full circle like this and to have gotten to fulfill all of these dreams that she never got to fulfill felt very American, and it felt very Jewish. So that was a good Jewish story in the White House.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sarah Hurwitz, I want to thank you for everything you shared with us tonight. I want to make sure everyone knows the name of the book, As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Blame, Shame, and Try to Erase Us. Authors, it's very important to us that you get the title. Rabbi Schatz, I don't know if we've been a model Hevruta, but Sarah, I do think you're a model of a Jewish learner for all of us. The way you dive into everything that you do, the way as an adult to learn, to take this all on and learn it and explain it to this room full of people is really inspiring. And I hope all of us take Sarah's model into this night of learning as we continue learning and engaging together and in the days ahead. So
thank you so much, Tom. Such a pleasure.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.